All right, guys, I think we should be live. Let me check before we get started here. Zoom and Facebook are doing their thing. I think we're now live. I want to welcome everybody to our second edition of Conversations with Cougars this week. And I've got my blindside tackle, Chris Lee, with us, coming from Nashville. Good evening, Chris. How you doing, bud?
We're doing awesome. How are you?
Doing just fine, just fine. Chris and I have been catching up on some old stories and trying to figure out which ones we actually think are true and which ones we're still going to tell. But we had such a fun time last night with Dewey, who was Chris's line mate our senior year, Dewey's junior year, and they protected my left side so admirably throughout the year.
Somewhat. Some days were better than others.
What you guys need to know, Pat Fitch at right tackle and Chris at left tackle, I outweighed both of those guys during the year. They're the ones who are supposed to be protecting me. And maybe that's why Coach Parrish went to the run and shoot and we got rid of the ball so quick. It seemed to work out. But
yeah.
For those of you who don't know Chris or maybe knew Chris back in the day, Chris and I are in the same graduating class of 86. And before I go on my part any further, Chris, tell folks what you're doing these days and what brought you to Nashville, and tell them about your beautiful family.
Yeah, so we've been in Nashville almost 13 years. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the Monroe Carroll Junior Children's Hospital at Vanderbilt. Run the practice there, and got a 14-year-old daughter that is the light of my life. And Vera, we'll talk about her a little later in the program because she's tied to some of this. And but we've been married 27 years, 26 years, something like that. But yeah, we've been here to love it and had a blast. Just been living the dream, taking care of the kids. Sorry, you see my sticker and my mask, and so yeah, this is my normal attire every day. And I apologize I didn't have time to change, but we've been dealing with what you've been hearing about all day, we're on our 101st day of command center dealing with it here at Vanderbilt. So, but we're doing really well. We're happy to say so.
Well, I'm glad to see you, and thank you for all the work that y'all are doing to help the folks in mid-state Tennessee. And we'll just leave it at that for now because we got a bunch of Cougar stories to talk about.
I got more than I can. I took I got papers and stuff. And, oh my gosh, it's just so many of them because it was such a phenomenal time of my life. And the joke is, my wife, she said we've been married 26 years, and she knows I'd go back to high school in a heartbeat.
As I know you would. And oh gosh, I don't know if I can list all these folks. Hold on just a second. Eric McAllister, Mark Saffold, Coach Jerry Andrews, Hunter Parrish, Keith Dudley, Rick Cazenave, Eric Easley, Missy Wright Morris, Tracy Donnell, and more. Pat Fitch are coming in.
Pat, you're not allowed to ask any questions, brother. He's already been texting me today going, I'm going to ask you this. I'm going to ask you. No, not answering.
And Pat's already screaming about hog power. But before we get into any specifics, Chris, I'm going to start off with just an overall question. I know that of all of my friends, all of my teammates who enjoyed high school football experience and relished in the state championship, what's one of your favorite memories from either that season or just as a whole about playing football and being in high school?
There's so many of them. You asked me that question earlier, and just so many trickle in and come in, and it was such a special team. And I think about hog power. I do. I think about how close we were as an offensive line, and I jokingly say, I know Lawrence Dossey's not on here. We went to football camp before our senior year, and I had a tendency to drive a little differently than he was accustomed to, and so we went to Alabama football camp, and just the four of us going to camp that year was so much fun. I think it was you and Shane and I, and it just getting to know him and that sort of thing. And the other thing I remember that I've heard as a theme on all of these, Bernard, is the school spirit. My daughter's at Brentwood Academy, and they're producing college athletes and that sort of thing. And we're fortunate, but I have never seen anything like being in that, in the what's behind you right there on the computers, how everybody just embraced it. The teachers embraced it. I mean, they wouldn't give us tests on a Friday after a Thursday game, and they all came to the games. I mean, Miss C, Mr. Helms came to the games. I mean, they all came to the games, and it just made a difference. All of it was so special, and it was a special group of people that I cherish regularly. Pat Fitch and I were texting today, where he was, giving me some pointers, if you will, and so we still keep in touch. And you and I played going back to elementary school. I mean, we played on teams together, and it was such a special time being so close to so many people, close to Lonnie Mathis, and Cassie and Jimmy McKenzie and, Rick Kazanov. I see his kids on Facebook, and, I'm not a big social media person. I don't post a lot of stuff. I'm more of a stalker, if you will. And I love seeing the people back in the day. And, Norris Thomas, you remember you and I played with Norris Thomas many years ago when we were a little thing. I still, touch base with him, and he was an NFL star, even though he didn't go to Northview. But it was so much fun back then.
It was a simpler time. I know it's easy to say that, but it really was. It wasn't a social media time of our lives.
Yeah.
It was cell phones. It was get out and go play in the yard or ride your bikes kind of time. And I know the younger people who may be watching this, they don't want to hear about any of that, but that's the way it was. That was our childhood.
Oh, yeah.
Not spent, hours on a couch or in a computer and those kind of things, because there wasn't that lifestyle.
Yeah.
We grew up. I do want to welcome Keith Rice, one of your fellow Hogs, on there.
So I love it.
In a minute, and Cece has joined us. So thank you, guys. We got so many folks who have joined us, and others who are going to roll in. Of course, I'm talking with Chris Lee, my blindside left tackle from our senior year and part of our junior year. But Chris, you transferred in, or you came in to Northview from Houston Academy. And I don't remember if you had started there, or did you start at Houston Academy and then just come all the way through 8th grade before you came over to Northview?
I did. So I started there. My sister was there. My brother actually went to Dothan High and was there when Stedman was there. And so I came over in the 9th grade, which meant I was ineligible. I couldn't play the 9th grade, but I was determined to play football. So if you remember, I actually practiced every single day. Coach Cleveland thought I was absolutely out of my mind to go through that, as you said last night, down in that, or when I watched Coach Cleveland down in that pit, the bowl that we used to go down there. And, it was so miserable. And we got the one water break with about that much water during that time. And then we'd roll out and I'd go to the games in a pair of shorts because I was not eligible to play. But even then I felt very embraced because of City Ball. I knew several of the players that were on there. And it was fun even then, even though it was torture being in that hot sun. I think a lot of people, maybe if they're on here, to be in the Alabama sun in August in a bowl where there was basically it was dirt, as you said, Alabama clay, dry Alabama clay. It was a workout, and it was hot, man. Running the hill. Do you remember running up and down the hill, going back and forth? But it was just fun. I mean, going back into the locker room, walking by the band that was practicing. I always remembered the band that practiced during our time, because we had our own iPad music the whole time we practiced, which was also a lot of fun to know and be able to have music at least while we were practicing. So yeah.
Well, remind me, your freshman year when you were practicing with us, what positions were they working?
Yeah. Dripping wet, I was probably 110 pounds. I was a big kid at Houston Academy and then came over, and I was very clearly little. Didn't realize how little I was. I was DB, and I was not fast enough. That's why I ended up where I was. But yeah, it was more DB wide receiver back then, and that's when you were kind of doing the thing and everybody's filling out. And I remember you saying, everybody threw to see who could do this. Everybody ran, you did your timing to see who was going to fit in positions and stuff. I didn't really fit in very well, from a position perspective, because it was a different world, but everybody was so much fun.
Yeah. Our class started out that first year. We had over 50 ninth graders on our baby Cougars team. And by the time we graduated, I think we had 17 or 18. Other guys
Wow.
found other sports, or they transferred schools, or they just didn't care for the sport enough to stay with it. But of course, I remember that ninth grade year because we had so much talent and it just needed to be harnessed. And by the time our ninth grade year ended, we had a pretty good team. We won more than we
Oh
lost.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
I
Morris
certainly,
Ward. You remember Morris Ward? He ran over me. I'll
Rev,
talk about a few. Or he ran over everybody. He was a tremendous player.
yeah.
Yeah.
I want to welcome Miss Shirley C., Ross Morris. Thank you guys for stopping in
Oh
with
wow.
and me, just going down some memories. At what point, eventually, obviously, you landed on the offensive line. Tell us how you ended up switching from being basically the opposite of a lineman to now you were trying to get into the trenches a little bit.
Well, interesting story. I don't know if Coach Cleveland will remember this or not.
Well, I'm sure he
but
will. He's not on yet. He will.
yeah, I know he will. But if you went to spring training our 10th grade year, so I stayed in the defensive back. I remember getting a forearm from Butch Henderson because he was older, and we'd practice that forearm angle drill. And I was like, man, this is killing me. I love to hit, but the talent was so good, and Coach Griffin was good to me and took care of me. But I realized I was really never going to play. I was not Robbie Arnold or Shane Wood or that group, and I just realized I wasn't going to play. So I got really depressed that spring, and I guess it was written on my face, believe it or not. And I never quit anything in my life. And I decided at that point that after spring training, I'd already talked to my mom and dad and said I was going to quit and just be done with football and find something else. And towards the last week of spring training, Coach Cleveland caught me going to my car and said, "Hey, I noticed you've been down. You have a lot of energy. You have a lot of spirit, I guess. And would you ever consider coming over to offensive line?" And I finished the last 2 days over on the offensive line. And sorry to my Hogs, it was a great practice because we didn't run as much as the DBs did. And I was like, this is it. You push the sled and that sort of thing. And I had some David Fricks. When he pushed the sled, I just remember him being huge, and Shaughnessy and Wells, and I mean, so many of them, and they just towered over me. And I went home and told Dad, I said, "Dad, I think I'm going to try to be offensive line." And my father, being the physician, absolutely lost his mind. He said, at 135 pounds, there is no way you're playing offensive line. You're going to get broken.
Yeah.
And he said, the deal being between now, spring, and fall of your junior year, if you put on, he said, if you get to 185 pounds, then I'll let you go out and play football again.
Wow. That was a big jump in 4 or 5 months.
Yeah. I was 137 pounds at the end of the year. And so I don't know if you remember, I hit the weight room hard. I ate 10 peanut butter jelly sandwiches every single day. I had a half a dozen eggs. Mother remembers this, fixing a half a dozen eggs, half a pound of bacon every single day. And I kept eating. And I don't know if you knew, we were good friends with the Vick family, who were the brothers who played offensive line at Alabama. They were all American, went to the pros. They were at Alabama at the year, good friends of Dad. And he told me, this is the diet you need to do. It's carbs and do this and work out. And I kept telling my dad over and over and over, and finally convinced him that if I weighed 165 pounds, he forgot 175 pounds, that if I got to 165 pounds, he'd let me play. And I got to 165. Don't tell him. I may have had a few rocks in my pocket.
Right.
And he said he'd let me play. He really, really didn't think even at that weight, playing at this, established school with these bigger kids that I'd ever see the field. And I didn't either, to be honest with you. I was just happy to be part of the team.
Well, much to your determination, some athleticism, a little bit of luck, mix it all together. You found your way to the field your junior year, our junior year, playing. Do you remember your first varsity action and what that felt like before you started knocking
Yeah.
kids?
So thinking I was going to be second, third string, thinking I'd never get to play. Let's be honest, I probably didn't learn all the plays as well as I probably should have. Probably ought to show you. Guess what? The entire playbook, Coach Parrish. I've never shared this. This is your playbook of all the years. I had the entire playbook of all the plays, and so see if I can remember you with some of them. You know, gosh, I remember all the speed right 35 read, and it was a lot of fun. And so right up leading to the first game at Robert E. Lee, if you remember, and we were up at Crampton Bowl, and I remember Coach Parrish, we were reviewing film from the previous year, and he was going through who was playing where and who was going to start here, who was going to start there. And for whatever reason, he never went over who was going to be on the left side on defense, or their right side, if you will. And then he moved Sean, who was the starting tackle, back to defense. And he looked at me and he said, "You're starting the week of the game." And so that's probably why I still have the playbook. I was frantically trying to learn that and thinking, I mean, what is he? Is he crazy? He's starting this junior at 165 pounds. And they never talked about the person that was going to be there. They knew every position. And that day of the game, we're up in Crampton Bowl and we're getting it ready. And I went up to Coach Parrish, who, you know, I didn't know I could talk to him, and he's turned out to be one of my dear friends. And I said, "Coach Parrish, you've never really talked about the person that's going to line up across from me and Dewey. And, you know, I want to know." And he's like, "Well, he's like All-American. He's recruited to all SEC schools. I don't remember who it was. He's just a beast, and we're going to stay away from him." I went in the bathroom in Crampton Bowl and threw up for 30 minutes thinking, "Are you kidding me? This guy's going to beat me." He did. I can't remember how badly, but he beat me pretty badly. But that was the first action. But I got a taste of it, and, you know, realized that maybe I can do some of this. And I think you actually came in that game and may have left you. I'm determined that was not my block, but you got blindsided by that guy. And
there were very few in our junior and senior years where that ever happened. But I was always convinced that either you on the left side or Pat on the right side just wanted to prove something to me. Y'all had some off the field issue that needed to be corrected, and that's how it got corrected.
We did. We did. There was never a time, and as we get to our senior, I'll tell you about one of the times that Dewey brought it up yesterday. It really was ingrained in us, for Patrick and I, that nobody got a free shot. It was just, you know, I'd come off of somebody, Patrick come off somebody to stop the blitz of a linebacker or something, because you figured the bigger guy was a little slower and you were going to maneuver or get rid of the ball fast enough. But there was never an opportunity that it was ever a thought that we would ever may just get a free shot after that day. So,
well, you knew you'd have to deal with the coaches, but probably even more importantly, or me, but you'd probably have to deal with Mama Ruth, and nobody wanted to deal with her.
Yes, that's true. Yes, I because you and I go back for so many years, and I was at your house many years. She welcomed us in. Absolutely, I did not want to disappoint Ruth. Yes, you got that right.
Well, it's going through our junior year. It wasn't as successful a year as we had hoped. Didn't make the playoffs, but we both got a lot of playing time that year, and it was a growth year. You know, we played some JV, and that was good. But it was by the time we finished that year, I never would imagine what would have happened our senior year. But I knew we had good pieces, and what I mean by that is we had excellent athletes all over the field. But it was 6A South Alabama football, and everybody had good players on both sides of the ball. And before we head into our senior year, I want to welcome Jackie Hydrick is with us. Thank you, Jackie. Lonnie Mathis has joined us, and Coach Randy Hicks.
Oh, Coach Hicks, I love Lonnie. I would tell you a funny story of my junior year. If you remember, Bernard, I was dating Sherry at the time. Sherry was the head cheerleader of Dothan High School. After we won our junior year Dothan Northview game, and Sherry was the sweetest thing, and we had the dance after the games like we always did, and I went over to her house. She lived over there by the stadium, and I pulled in her driveway to pick her up, and picked her up. And we went to the dance, and didn't know anything. And about 2 weeks later, I went to see her again, and they had a little bitty miniature boxer that they loved. Her mama loved, and her sister Carrie loved. And little did I know that night that I had actually hit the dog pulling into the driveway. And as soon as Sherry and I left to go to the dance, her mother took her to the vet and had to have major hip surgery. And I felt so bad. You're talking about coming in feeling on top of the world that you'd won the game. And I had to be apprehensive about being too excited about going in and picking up your date. And, here I almost killed her dog after the game. I mean, it was
if any of you guys know Chris Lee, that's about par for the course. That's about right.
It was awful. It was awful. And I still keep in touch with Sherry, and she has terriers to this day, Boston Terriers. So yeah, she's an attorney in Atlanta. So yeah.
Well, Chris, going into the spring of our junior year, leading before our spring of our junior year, leading into our senior year, I remember that our spring training was pretty tough. And what I mean by that was not that the coaches made it tough. It was that the to-be seniors, us juniors, made it tough. And I just remember a series of conversations, some with all of us, some with just a few of us at the time, that it was our last opportunity. It was the opportunity to do something special. Not that we ever really could have ever imagined what happened. I just remember having those feelings and those thoughts, and then going into the summer, lots and lots and lots of 7-on-7s, or we didn't call it back then, but just getting together with the wide receivers in the backs all the time. I remember many beach trips that were not taken that summer. I remember we took some, but it was nothing like it had been in the past. I guess we just got that serious. Oh, Woo Woo Parker is now joining us. A blast!
Oh gosh.
And Woo was going to be.
Yeah, I think I still have a scar from when he ran over me coming out of that backfield when I was playing in the defensive back. Woo hit me so hard. That may have been when I decided I needed to quit football.
Well, I'm sure you're in good company with a whole bunch of other folks. With those
yeah, he ran over a lot of people.
He sure did. But let's talk about some of that dedication that seniors going into our senior year, getting ready. I just remember, and you may not have known this, but in ninth grade, I didn't want to play football initially, but Coach Parrish assured that I was going to. I had
playing baseball.
I had told him, Coach, I'm going to concentrate on baseball this year.
Yeah.
He says, that's okay. We'll see you Monday morning. You got practice. So of course I did. But I just remember being so focused on getting ready for our senior year, and it just seemed like a different tone than it had been in the past. You have any memories of that summer and leading into that fall camp, that time?
Oh my gosh. I think, back then people don't realize that you couldn't have interaction with the coaches during the summer. And, that was when Harry Wayne was ahead of the curve and coaches were ahead of the curve, and they gave us direction to do over the summer. Come in X over your weights, or come in under your run weights. I didn't make my mile my sophomore year, and I had to run it after practice until you made it. Decided that was never going to happen. But I think, that summer, that was the summer that you and Shane and Lawrence and I went to football camp. Harry Wayne pushed us to go to football camp. And I think at that point, you felt like we were different. We joked with Lawrence. Remember, we used to call him franchise in the car, and we got to go up there, and something I didn't get to experience. You got to see. We were at football camp with some great players. From Opelika, there was all of those that were there, and Sean Smith was there, who hit me the hardest ever our senior year in that game. Tore my face mask off, if you remember, and I had the big offensive lineman face mask. But we went out there that summer, and then came back, and I remember being out there, and you were throwing passes to Chris Holmes and David Hogan when we didn't have to practice, and people didn't have to be there, but everybody was willing to do it. It was so much fun. I obviously remember football camp as a one of the funny stories when we went there. Bernard, I don't know if I ever told you this, was Dubose was the offensive line coach at the time under Ray Perkins, and I get over there and we break up, and he walks over and he goes, "Son, I think you're in the wrong group." And I said, "No, sir." And he looked at me and he said, "What little private school do you play for?" And I said, "I actually play for Northview." He said, "You play for Harry Wayne Parish?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He goes, And that was about the extent of it. I thought he dismissed me, and turns out he turned out to be pretty nice to me during that senior year. But it was so much fun. Chris Holmes was there, and Manny Venegas and Cassie, and we all felt so close. And I don't know what it was. You're right, Bernard. It was something that everybody was just so tight. And the one thing I remember is there was a desire to win, but nobody ever got on anybody. I don't remember that. I remember everybody being encouraging, that if something went wrong and the coaches were yelling at us to get something right, there was never a sense of get it right. It was always, all right, here's how you get it right. The encouragement and that sort of thing. So I just remember that part.
Chris, we put in a brand new offense leading into that year. And it wasn't like we had thousands of reps and hundreds of hours of practice with it. We were in a hurry, and we didn't start off the season very hot, particularly when our number one player breaks his arm first series. So that kind of put a damper on things, in addition to the hurricane that pushed the league first game back to a Monday.
Yeah.
We played in a 10-game span. Not many people realize we played 3 varsity games in 10 days and didn't fare very well, but we got through it. Lawrence came back either for the 4th or 5th game, and then we won 10 out of the last 11. But I just can remember, with all those overtimes, there was never panic. We were never out of any games. The defense was so good, and our offense slowly got better during the course of the year. So by the time we rolled around to the Dothan High game, even though we lost that game, it turned out really the chips just fell in the right place for us. If you remember, obviously we lost in overtime to Dothan High, which gave Dothan High the win for the area. So they played Central of Phoenix City, and James Joseph got hurt. Coach Parrish has famously told, before the first game of playoffs, he goes to Montgomery. They've got all the 6A teams in alphabetical order, and they're calling out each of the teams. And who is the lowest ranked team in the playoffs for 6A? Well, that's us at 6-4. Northview. The next team, Opelika, the number 1 team in the state, chuckles at Northview. Well, we go up to Opelika, and I'm going to let you take over for that game. Obviously, we did okay. And this is where Vera, your wife, comes in.
Yeah. So I'll back up just a little bit and tell you, Dewey brought up something that I'd actually forgotten. Maybe I'll do it afterwards, but because I didn't play in the homecoming game our senior year because I was injured.
But go ahead.
So if you don't remember, right before the homecoming game, right at halftime, you probably don't. Right before halftime, there was a blindside block coming in on your right side, delayed blitz, and you were looking back on the weak side, and I saw him coming in out of the corner of my eye, and I dove. And when I dove, he folded this way, collapsed on me. My shoulder and his whole weight landed on my shoulders and actually tore the second rib and third rib off my sternum. You'd thrown the ball, Hail Mary down right before that. The band came on, trainer came out. I'm blinking. And he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I can't breathe." And I said, "Don't tell anybody. You didn't want anybody to know you're injured. You lose your spot." I hate to say it that way. We were just trained that way. You just So he got me over, and I remember sitting over at Rip Hughes. I said, just get my pads off. You trained us, change your shirt underneath. At halftime, made you feel better. You just felt better. And I had done that a couple of times, and I remember struggling to get my shoulder pads off, and Coach Sellers saw that, and there's a big knot like golf ball right on my chest, and I said, I'm fine, don't worry about it, I'm fine. We got the orthopedic surgeon that was there, David, gosh, I can't remember, it wasn't David Alford, but he comes over and he touches me on my chest, and I go to my knees. By the time Dad had seen me and come out of the stands, they took me to the emergency room, and sure enough, I had dislocated those ribs. So I didn't get to play the homecoming game, but and then I got a knee pad the next week before the next game. I think it may have been Dothan, and we taped a knee pad to my chest. And you remember, I don't know if you remember in practice, that was what Dewey was talking about. I was out there and I wasn't supposed to be in practice, and I snuck in as a wide receiver. And I don't know if it's you or Jamie, we were running the defense. The ball was high, and oh gosh, I can't remember whoever was playing cornerback. The play didn't work. So Coach Perry said, run it again. He's wide open. This is the play they're going to run. We ran it again. The ball was a little high. Full form tackle behind my thighs, full chest. And I remember Coach Ragsdale going, oh my gosh, we've broken him, because I thought I was done. Fortunately, I was not. But anyway, going back to Opelika, yes, I remember that being one of the most physical games from my perspective. Sean Smith always lined up on my side, who was a tremendous athlete. Yes, the coach, he did laugh. I do have something here that's quite interesting. I actually have the program from the Opelika side of that game. My wife went to Opelika High School. She was a senior in Opelika High School during that game, and she didn't go to the game, which was amazing to me. She was not present. But that game, we didn't start out killing them off the top, and we ended up coming back and driving it. And I remember doing that. Coach Joe Wilson, there he is right there in the program. But I remember that being such a physical game, and we ended up running a lot in the third and fourth quarter. And I remember one time
we slowed down the game.
Yeah, slowed the game down. That's right. And I remember one time we did a lot of run and gun. That's the reason why I was able to play. I didn't hit the guy across from me very often because he was, outweighed me by 100 pounds. So I pulled a lot. And I remember one particular play, I pulled out, and, it was outside, and I met Sean Smith, and I thought he's not going to get the best of me. And I put my face down and hit him as absolutely hard as I could. Of course, Sean didn't move. He was much bigger than I was. I was able to get in the way. I was more of a speed bump than I ever was a blocker, but he hit him as hard as I could. He didn't make the tackle, so I kind of felt like it was okay. We get back to the huddle, and I'll never forget you looking at me, and I'm sitting in the huddle, and I noticed everything was a lot clearer. I couldn't figure out why. And you looked at me like you always did, and you okay? And I'm like, I'm not sure. I think I am. And you reached up, and I'll never forget, you put your hand on my face. Mm-hmm. And I thought, that's odd. Why do you do that? And he goes, you don't have a face mask. And you could hear Coach Sellers on the sideline going, Chris, come here, get a new face mask. So I had to rush out. But Sean Smith hit me so hard that it broke all of the lock and bolts of that face mask. And he came over to the huddle and handed it to me. And I thought, oh my gosh, the power was just, it was amazing. But yeah, I was out for a play or two, but came back and ended up winning that game. And I give my wife lots of grief. I kid her and tell her about, our friend that was stabbed after the game and went to the emergency room, and, those were her friends. I'm like, yeah, y'all were just like that and stuff like that. So probably you, honey, I'm not turning my back on you. But yeah, it was a phenomenal game, and we were so glad to get out of there.
Yeah. And then the second game, anyway, the third game of the playoffs. Well, second game, we beat Central Phoenix City at home. They didn't have James Joseph, who had gotten hurt in that game. And then the third game really is the game that put us on the map. It was the game that everybody knows. It was the late come from behind win at Robert E. Lee. They had such a powerhouse running attack with Larry Ware, who went on to Georgia and played so well at Georgia. And Larry was he was a junior. In his senior year, I think he was the number one player, not only in the state, but maybe in the Southeast. He was such a great athlete. But that game, and I will never forget this. There's a couple things that stand out. The run and shoot, it all came together in the fourth quarter. The coach
The fourth quarter
didn't change the defense on us, so we just kept eating. Anyway, where it all started, for those of you who don't know or may misremember, we were down 27-10 with about 10 minutes and 15, 16 seconds left to go in the game. And, at that point, we didn't know what we were going to be able to accomplish. We just a little bit at the time. And I can remember coming in the huddle, had the play, coach, at the time, the plays were run in and out by the wide receivers. But on that play, I had taken the play from the sidelines because it was after either a punt or a kickoff. I can't recall which it was, but we had the ball. And I can just remember a conversation. It was very brief, a comment or two that were said in the huddle before we started. And I'm going to let you pick up from there, because it was just one of those mood and so timely that it was.
Well, it was one of those where, we were a very light-hearted team but very serious. And I think Bernard comes over and says motivational thing. And I think I looked at you and said, well, Bernard, we got them right where we want them. And we're going to win the game. And I never really thought we weren't going to win that game. Even though he ran all over us the first half, I never felt like it was impossible to come back. It was like, okay, all right, now it's time. Let's start playing. And to watch, I think that was when you went on a passing spree, and Holmes and Hogan caught a million passes, and Lawrence ran all over the place. Isaac Selter ran over the place. And the fourth quarter was just fun. I mean, when you score that kind of points for a bunch of linemen sitting there in the trenches, and you score that kind of points in a short period of time, you feel awesome. And that is truly one of the things. And after that game, one of the best pictures of my entire life, if you can see that is after that game in the bottom of Cranberry Bowl with my mother. If you notice, I wore a lot of pads to make myself look big, because I wasn't very big.
Big Hulk hands, those big pads.
Yeah, I had arm pads and things, and that was after that particular game. And one of the best things I remember, was at being in the bottom of Crampton Bowl, going, yeah. And it was just a blast. It was so much fun. You played phenomenal that night.
Well, it was clearly a team effort in that fourth quarter, but your comments just kind of broke the mood in a good way. And for those of you who remember, Hogan caught 3 touchdown passes that quarter. But then one of the most fun things to me, and it was the last touchdown. We were going for 2. I did such a beautiful job of throwing an interception.
Two, John, Quentin Riggins, right?
Yeah, Quentin Riggins off the interception. And I just walked off the field. You can watch the replay clear as day. I could have just reached out and tackled him, kicked him.
You actually had to speed up your walk, Bernard, to get out of his way.
Back then, you could not return a fumble or an interception on a 2-point attempt. Well, he took it back the other way. Well, here comes David Hogan out of nowhere and chased him the entire length, because Quentin caught the ball in the end zone, chased him over 95 yards, zigzagging to the end. And
they were zigzagging. It wasn't a straight line either.
You can hear Nathaniel on the TV broadcast. He was cracking up. Well, David tackles him on about the 2, and they both just fall out. And Lee was getting penalized for that, for delay of game. But anyway, it wasn't until I think that Mike told us it was Flowers or Mark Reeves had the big hit on their little flea flicker, and Mike ended up with the fumble later in that quarter, that any of us could breathe at all. We were up by then.
Yeah.
Finally got the ball back. But gosh, that was just a game that everybody will remember, regardless if you were playing or in the stands. And it's kind of like I've joked with Dewey and others, when we were at the state championship game a few weeks later, in my mind's eye, there were 70, 80,000 people in the
Oh
stands.
yeah. Oh yeah. There was 100,000 people there at least.
Or more. But in reality, it was 20 to 22,000. But to us, the entire city of Dothan was there.
Oh
So
my gosh. I've described our season as Bernard. We only really won one game. That happened to be the state championship game where we actually, really just won. The rest of them we just squeaked out at the very end. It was like we were never accustomed to being in the lead, so I don't think we ever got scared of being behind. I don't think that was ever the thing.
Our parents in the stands for those games. I'm sure their stress level was way higher than ours.
Oh my gosh, they were so stressed, and they called us the cardiac Cougars. And the other thing I remember though is John Cook in the stands where they painted and had the trench coats, and the fans never left. I mean, you would have thought at Robert E. Lee that people would have left us being down almost over 3 touchdowns. But they still were there. They were there at the end of the game. Everybody was there and never felt like we were going to lose. And that, how many overtimes did we do? 4 or 5 games, and Robert Lee wasn't even.
Yeah.
And 3 with Enterprise, 3 overtimes with Enterprise, and Robert Lee didn't go to overtime, but it sure felt like it did.
Yeah.
It was just surreal. It was always surreal. And at the end of the games, I remember being in the locker room. I mean, we were always happy, but it was like, okay, we got the job done.
It was very businesslike. You're right. But I want to take you to after the state championship game. There's an awesome photo, and I've posted it a few times, of you and Manny and Shane running around the field with the big flag. And that had to have been the best feeling in the world.
Oh my gosh.
Do you remember it? Do you remember?
Yes, I do. I can't remember exactly. It came from the cheerleaders. I can't remember if Carrie or who gave it to us. Elizabeth Ball, and gave it to Shane and I and Manny. And Shane and I just looked at each other and we said, well, let's just run. Because I think at that point, some of the boxes of the Huffman T-shirts with their, you had to print the stuff up. We didn't know that, but you print the stuff up in advance. Had come out, and the fans were still there yelling and screaming. And we just took off, started running. I mean, who would have thought after a game that we'd have enough energy? I certainly after a game felt like I had been run over by a Mack truck many times when Charlie Dare at Enterprise stepped on my face, and he told me he was going to do it, and I had to ask Dewey to help me out a few times with that. But it was so much fun running around. I don't remember that picture being taken. I do remember the one with Elizabeth and Carrie being taken. I felt like one of the most privileged people in the world when they came over the fence, if you will, right there. And that was such a different place right there running. Bernard, you and I were big Alabama fans and spent a lot of time in that stadium as kids. And to be able to go, little known fact, if you remember that state game, we got up there the days before and played on turf. And you and Dewey talked to a little about the turf. We hated the turf. We'd never been on the turf. Do you remember what shoes I wore during the state championship game?
I'm going to guess that they were basketball shoes, but I don't remember.
They were your high tops. Because I didn't have any high tops, and all I had was cleats. And all I remember going, I got nothing to play. And you came over and you said, I got these high top tennis shoes. Why don't you try these high tops? And I think I played in your high tops because, we couldn't wear our thick cleats that we played, obviously, because we were not built for that type of thing. And the only time I can tell you, the only time that I ever lined up against across from somebody directly across from me that didn't outweigh me by 100 pounds. You go back and look, I was outweighed by 100 pounds by every player that we ever faced against, except for the guy from Huffman. He walked up, he was a little bitty guy like me. He was very cross-eyed. I'll never forget it. And I thought, this is going to be the easiest game we ever played. And if you remember, we were 3 and out. I mean, it was like, and he could get lower than I could. None of the big, Charlie Dare couldn't get lower than I was. None of these guys get lower. I thought, man, this is going to be a long game. He's running up through me.
And Chris, then they scored the early touchdown. We're down.
Yeah.
First quarter, Chris Tippett scores, Cece's cousin, and then Aristotle returns that fumble 90-plus yards, and that really set the tone for the rest of the game because by halftime, remember we scored
it was over.
In half.
Yeah, it was over.
I convinced Coach Parrish to let me throw one up because David was much faster than their DB, and he caught it. And so we were up 25-7 at half. And before we go further, I want to welcome Mark Reeves, who
Mark Reeves.
Mark Reeves says, "Hey Chris, sorry about the hit at practice. I can."
That was Mark Reeves. That was Mark Reeves.
That's awesome. Awesome. And
Yes, it was.
And one of our baby Cougar teammates, Tim Bright, is with us. Hey Tim, it's good to see you.
Oh, Tim Bright. And Mark, thank you for not permanently hurting me. That was Mark Reeves. Yes.
Yeah. But going back to the end of the game, Chris, the game is over. We did, we accomplished what few do. And then we came on back to Dothan. And I will never forget the reception and crowd that we had. And it was very late. It was after midnight.
After midnight.
Radio station and maybe the TV station were there. And then we've got that awesome photo that you and me and Coach and Kevin and maybe Hogan are in.
Hogan, yep.
And I just
that's in my, if you notice behind me, that's in my shadow box.
Oh, and now I see it. I sure do.
And don't, none of the coaches, please don't report me that we did steal our jerseys. And do you remember, Bernard? Do you see the white one? I know it's hard to tell, but do you remember they were a little pink?
Yeah, when they got washed, they bled.
Yeah, they had the pink Cougars. Remember all the signs from the opposing team? They used to call us the pink baby Cougars. Yeah, it's still pink. So yeah.
After that game was over and we got to celebrate, the upcoming weeks and months afterward, I can remember still being on a high, of course, but then just feeling a little let down knowing that group was never going to be a team again. We would never play again together. We had reached the pinnacle. We had done what we wanted and all of our dreams came true, but then we were done. And then a few months later, we graduated and went our separate ways. Do you have any thoughts? Do you have any recollections of that time period? I know it was such a blur, but
I remember getting our rings. That was a special day in the gym, and it was so nice that the whole school came out when we got our rings. And one of the things I'll miss, a little known fact, Shane Wood and I used to sneak off before every game, and we'd watch the national anthem before every game. Got in trouble all the time because we weren't doing what we're supposed to be doing. But I guess I think it's Brad Paisley that sings the song, about your last year, give me one more or whatever. And when I hear that now, living in the country music capital of the world, it's, I guess I didn't realize at that time it was such a special time. But there was so much going on, and everybody was, so cool their senior year. And so many people went to play college. You went to play college. A lot of people went to play college football, and it was just a fun time. I think I lost you, Bernard.
Chris, you still there?
Oh, there you go. Now you came back.
Yeah, sometimes internet sometimes does what it wants to do. We've got about 3 or 4 minutes before we get to the end of our discussion. And there's so many other areas where we could go because there's, as you've mentioned, you were always outweighed, probably taller guys against you on the other side, but the blocking scheme that the coaches put together for our run and shoot did not make you guys hold your blocks too terribly long because we got rid of the ball so quickly.
Yeah, you'd have gotten killed if you'd have had me holding Charlie Dare for more than about 2 seconds. You'd have gotten killed. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if you remember, but in the Fairhope game, the semifinals, that was at Rip Hughes. It had rained. It was a sloppy field. They had Leon Lett, who later played in the pros for the Cowboys and maybe some other teams, but he was on the other side. And I don't know if he was against you or against Pat, but I certainly knew who he was. We game planned a little bit away from him, and thankfully Lawrence picked up my fumble to score, and then Clark knocked home the overtime field goal to put us into the finals. But I just remember it being such a sloppy field.
Oh, it was awful.
And even with the run and shoot, the linemen are still down there in the trenches. And here's what I want you to share. Are there any tricks that you learned that year that fans in the stands don't ever see, don't know about, because you
Yeah,
had
and
doing some of that with smoke and mirrors to keep them out.
yeah, there's no doubt I was doing some things that you couldn't see. And if you remember Leon Lett, he lined up anywhere he wanted to. If you can see my fingers, my pinkies do not straighten and they do not connect, but they were my hooks. So if we did the blocking and I could get my hooks into you, I became more of a life jacket, and you couldn't get away. You know, you couldn't make the tackle if I was attached to you like a tick.
Oh, that's
So I'd
fun.
get my hooks in, and so yeah, there were several times that I'd attach to somebody, and they, Isaac or Lawrence could get by just because they couldn't get their arms off because they had this 165-pound weight on their front chest, but it wouldn't go away. So yeah, there was a lot of that. I spent a lot of time below the waist, if you know what I mean. I rarely hit anybody high. I cut the legs out of them. That was what I tried to do.
Well, with you and Pat, what you didn't have maybe in size, you certainly made up in speed and definitely heart. And I don't know of too many teams on a 6A level where the quarterback outweighed the two tackles.
I'm going to be brain dead in 10 years because I've got hit in the head so many times. But I was like the stick you throw in between somebody's feet, and did what I could do. You know, that was Dewey and Mark Smith. They could move people. I did more of an interference kind of thing. And I remember Lawrence. He could dance down a sideline like nobody I'd ever seen. And Isaac, who carried us for so many games. I mean, it was just fun to watch him. LaRue running up the middle and just punishing people. That was the other thing you learned real quick. You had to move because you didn't want to get hit in the back from LaRue. You know, he was coming through the hole, whether it was open or not. And you learn real quick, get it open. Because you didn't.
Oh, believe me, I know, because if I turned the wrong way, I got steamrolled a few times. It didn't take long because back then we weren't in the shotgun. We were under center every play.
Yeah, every play.
LaRue, bless his heart, was full of energy and athleticism. And if he was going in one way, you better get out of his way. But
yeah, he was a Tonka truck.
Well, guys, sadly, we've now come to the end of our conversation. As you guys know, Chris and I go way back, and we could talk for hours, and we probably will after this anyway, without y'all. Yeah. But Chris, I want to leave you with if I'm a high school kid, if I'm at Brentwood Academy, and I'm thinking about I want to play, but I'm undersized, and I've got some athletic ability, but I'm unsure of myself. What is it that you think that you need as that undersized athlete to be able to compete, to be able to get up there and do some good things?
Well, you got to be a little stupid, but I think that, one of the things that I appreciated so much that was so special to our team was our coaching. And, I remember Coach Sutter saying, "Do you really want to play?" And I was like, "Yes." And he goes, "Okay." I don't know if you remember my junior year, I was so serious about it. After practice, Cleveland remembers this. Harry Wayne remembers this. I sat and pushed that sled for an hour after practice when everybody went to the locker room, that one-man sled for an hour. Dad would sit out there with me, and, I learned, a lot more about form. It wasn't strength, it was form. That if you learned form, then you could take down the bigger guys. You learn to play smarter, not harder. And I learned a little bit of that stuff from Alabama football camp. But I remember sitting out there running sprints by myself and pushing that sled by myself. And Coach Ragsdale was so good to me. Even then, he was on defense. But it was all learning a little trick. The other thing was also learning who you played against. That was so key because you could play against some of the guys, but if you knew they were strong on one side and of their body versus the other side, or had a weakness somehow, think about it. You got to play a little smarter to be able to go against some of those guys, because we played against some absolutely phenomenal people, and people played. I think the reason why I was able to succeed was, when you got to play against Cassie and Mark Reeves and the group, they were all, phenomenal players. So if I were even going to make the team, I had to at least be able to try to compete with college athletes that were in high school. So, you learn then. And I remember some, I still remember some of the things I could do. It was little things that it was just minor things. And all you had to do with our guys was give them the opportunity and they would go right by. And that's all you had to do.
Yeah, it was a very smart, not only athletic group of seniors,
Smart team,
but a very smart team as well. Well, guys, sadly, we've come to the end of our conversation with Cougars this week with Chris Lee. Some great memories. Some may be a little bit stretched. Some may be true. I'm not sure. But
they're all true. And my daughter is sitting outside in the kitchen. She's wearing my, you remember our undershirt, the Northview undershirt that we wore under our pads? Yeah, she has now come to that.
how in the world has that thing not been thrown away? But anyway,
it is. It's awful.
Well, you tell Mary Duncan, give us a call. We'll set her straight on some. But guys, that's going to do it for this week. We've got another interview lined up for in 2 weeks. I'm taking off next week. Going to go social media silent for a change. But thank you as always for everybody who's contributing and all the comments and the folks who join me on the conversations. We're going to keep doing these throughout the summer and until we're done with them. But thank you again, Chris. It's always good to catch up with you, bud.
Yeah, I love you. We'll talk to you soon.
Take care, guys. Be well.
See ya.